Hello, my name is Larry Cohen. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist in Washington, D.C., where I specialize in helping people struggling with social anxiety and related problems. I co-founded and co-chair the National Social Anxiety Center, which is a network of many regional clinics around the United States, all dedicated to providing and fostering effective evidence-based services for people with social anxiety. Since 1990, I've been directing the Social Anxiety Help Clinic here in Washington, D.C., where we have helped more than 1,000 people with social anxiety in both individual and group cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Welcome to this session on building self-confidence for those who struggle with social anxiety. What is meant by social anxiety? It's the fear of judgment, of scrutiny, of embarrassment, of rejection, of criticism. It's perfectly normal, actually, and in some ways it's very useful. It's necessary. It keeps us humble and sensitive to other people. Without social anxiety, we probably could not build healthy relationships, nor could we foster society in which we are concerned about each other's needs. Social anxiety disorder, on the other hand, is when the fear of judgment, embarrassment, criticism, and rejection becomes debilitating in an ongoing way for somebody. It makes it impossible, or at least very difficult, to pursue major life goals, such as making friends, pursuing romantic relationships, advancing career, being assertive, or simply being out and about doing life activities when others are around. Social anxiety happens because we have underlying core beliefs that we are in some way fundamentally deficient, not good enough. In other words, social anxiety disorder can be thought of as diminished self-confidence. Self-confidence is believing in ourselves, believing in our abilities. Self-confidence and social anxiety are two ends of a continuum. The more we believe in ourselves and our abilities, the more self-confident we are, the less socially anxious we will be. The more socially anxious we are, the less self-confident we are. Our self-confidence begins to develop in childhood through messages we receive through life experiences, perhaps from our parents and other family members, perhaps from teachers, very often from peers, very often through experiences of social trauma, of very painful experiences in which we were embarrassed or humiliated or rejected, teased, or even bullied. We can't do anything to change the past, however, but we can change what we've learned through the past. And one thing, unfortunately, we've learned from the past is bad habits that foster our social anxiety by diminishing our self-confidence. One of those chief bad habits that we develop through past experiences is rumination, the tendency to go over negative thoughts about ourselves over and over and over, just like a cow or sheep or other ruminants chew their cud over and over and over. Only in our case, what we're ruminating are negative thoughts about ourselves. Before a social interaction or some sort of performance like public speaking or other kinds of situations that trigger our anxiety, we will often ruminate in worry, concerned about how are we going to come across during the interaction. Will we embarrass ourselves? Will we make a bad impression? Will others judge us, reject us? After a social interaction or some other performance, we will often ruminate, sometimes for very long periods of time, sometimes off and on for years, beating ourselves up over not having handled the situation perfectly. Whether we ruminate with anxiety ahead of time or we ruminate with self-recrimination afterwards, either way, that rumination lowers our self-confidence and increases our social anxiety for the next experience. Why do we ruminate? As I said earlier, socially anxious people have negative core beliefs about ourselves in which we think we are deficient. And so we ruminate in an effort, a self-defeating effort, but an effort nonetheless to try to overcome our deficiencies. We worry in advance in the hope that that worry will prepare us so as to avoid making a fool of ourselves during the interaction, to avoid making a bad impression. And we beat ourselves up afterwards in an effort to try to learn from the situation so that we can do a better job the next time. Sounds logical. It makes sense while we ruminate, except that it doesn't work. And it's worse than not working. It backfires. Rumination just lowers our self-confidence. It makes us feel even worse about ourselves. It reinforces our negative core beliefs about being deficient, about not being good enough. Rumination also increases our anxiety. When we worry ahead of time, we experience a great deal of anticipatory anxiety, which makes it more likely that we will experience much anxiety during the interaction that we were worrying about. And when we ruminate after an interaction, we end up feeling depressed and ashamed. We feel badly about ourselves, which sets us up to worry and feel anxiety about the next interaction. So although we ruminate as a safety-seeking behavior in an effort to try to overcome our supposed deficiencies and to make better impressions, rumination just makes us feel worse about ourselves, lowers our self-confidence, and increases our social anxiety. Let me give you an example of different parenting styles that might suggest a little bit about how we learned to feel negatively about ourselves and to ruminate. Imagine a parent of an elementary school-aged child, and the child comes home from school and says to her parent, "Look, Dad, look at this project that I did in school. Isn't it nice?" And imagine that the father or mother looks at the project and says, "Well, honey, I'm really rather disappointed in this. You can do so much better than that. I know you can. You've done better in the past. And I know other kids in your class are doing better than that. I'm really feeling disappointed about your work. I hope you do a better job next time." How do you think that affects the kid? Chances are the kid will feel ashamed, feel very discouraged. Some children will work harder and harder to try to gain the parents' approval, and maybe that will help them in some ways, but they're likely to develop a fear of disapproval and experience much social anxiety in adulthood. Some kids will give up trying sooner or later if they keep experiencing this kind of reaction from their parents, feeling like, what's the use? I'm just not good enough. Either way, this disapproving parenting style lowers the self-confidence in the child, even though the parent is probably not acting out of malice, but out of a desire to help the child improve. But obviously it doesn't work. It lowers the child's self-confidence, makes him or her feel terrible about herself, and increases their social anxiety, especially as they grow up. Now imagine the opposite parenting style. An elementary school age child coming home from school, showing his mother, "Look, Mom, look at this project I did in school." And imagine this mother's response to her child is, "Oh, that is fantastic. I can't believe what a good job you did. This is so special. I bet this is the best project in the whole class. You are so special. You're better than any other student in the class. I'm so very proud of you. You are truly special. I can't wait to tell your father." Now, obviously, this child is likely to feel better in the short run than the child who had a very disapproving parent. However, if this parent keeps affirming the child's specialness and never suggests ways that the child can improve, then this child could grow up not with social anxiety, but a sense of being different in a positive way and somehow being better or more special than anyone else. And also, the child may grow up expecting to be affirmed for all of his efforts, which is not how adult life is, sadly. Now imagine a third parenting style, in which an elementary school age child comes home to his parent, and the father or mother says, "Boy, this is such a good project. I'm so proud of you. This is so beautiful. I can't wait to tell your mother. I am really very proud of you. And you know what? I can think of a couple ways that you can even do a better job the next time. For example, next time you might want to try to do a little bit of A and maybe a little less of B. I am so proud of this project. Congratulations." Now, in this parenting style, the child is likely to feel good about himself because he received the approval and the pride from his parent, but the child is also likely to learn from this experience how he can improve his performance the next time. I would argue that this third parenting style is the ideal one. And the reason I'm telling you this analogy is we can learn to be a good parent to ourselves. Too often we are the disapproving parent who beats ourselves up for not being good enough, for not having handled an interaction well enough, for having made a bad impression, or so we think. Actually, research shows that socially anxious people make better impressions than they believe that they do, but nonetheless, like a bad parent, we keep disapproving of ourselves. We keep disapproving of the ways we interacted with others or performed in front of others. We keep beating ourselves up, just like a bad parent does. We can learn to be a good parent to ourselves. I believe there are 2 steps in being a good parent to yourself. Step 1 is after an interaction, when you notice that you start feeling badly about how well you did, how well you performed, how well you conversed, how well you believe you came across, the negative impression you fear that you made. When you begin to ruminate, catch yourself and then out loud, and ideally also in writing, tell yourself what you can be proud of. Just like a parent would say, "I'm really proud of you that you did such and such." Tell yourself, for example, "I'm really proud of myself that I went to this social activity, for example. This is the kind of thing that I often would have avoided due to social anxiety. I'm really proud of myself that I said hello to several new people during this interaction and that I had a few conversations. I'm really proud of myself that I tried to focus more mindfully on the conversation and to get out of my head and to focus instead with curiosity on the person and what they were saying. And I'm really proud of myself that I didn't leave early as an escape, as I often have, but instead stayed for quite a while, and that my anxiety decreased over time." So these are examples of things that you could say to yourself beginning with, I'm really proud of myself that. And please be as specific as possible. If you're very general and just say something like, I'm really proud of myself that I tried, the implicit message is, yeah, I tried, but I failed. So be as specific as possible about the positive things you did, and indeed that you can be proud of. That's the first step in being a good parent to yourself. The second step is to identify what can you learn from this experience. In particular, what can you learn from anything that didn't go as well as you had wished, as well as anything that went reasonably well. So rather than criticizing yourself, rather than putting yourself down, and certainly rather than beating yourself up for any imperfections, you would simply be identifying constructive learning points, turning this experience into one of learning so that you can improve in the future and build more self-confidence. For example, you could say, from this experience, I learned that I actually come across better than I think that I do. I learned that if I focus mindfully on the conversation or on what I'm saying, rather than on evaluating myself in my thoughts, that I do well enough in conversation or in the performance. And I learned that my anxiety tends to go down the more I engage, the less I avoid, and the more mindfully focused I am on the person, the conversation, and the activity. I also learned that I need to practice this mindful focus further, because too often I slip into my mind and begin focusing on self-critical thoughts, which only pulls me out of the conversation, makes me perform less well, and increases my anxiety. And I also learn that sometimes I still avoid talking to people that I would really like to talk to, perhaps the people I'm most attracted to, so next time I want to go out of my way and talk to those people as well. This is an example of the second step of being a good parent to yourself, where you're identifying what you can learn from the experience, both the positive and negative elements, in a way that is constructive and forward-moving, without harsh self-criticism and without beating yourself up. So again, the 2 steps to being a good parent to yourself is after every interaction in which you experience any kind of social anxiety, and certainly whenever you start to ruminate and start to be self-critical, step 1 is to identify specifically the positive things that you did and to affirm them with statements of, I am proud of myself that I, and to list all the positive things that you did. Do this out loud and do this in writing. Step 2 is to identify any learning points that you can generate from this experience, both from the positive elements of what you did, as well as from any negative elements. Rather than criticizing yourself or putting yourself down, instead identify what you can learn from this that you want to take into future interactions and performances. In summary, one way to think about this being a good parent to ourselves strategy is that we are learning to pat ourselves on the back rather than beat ourselves up. There is another way to help you build self-confidence and to lessen your social anxiety. I call it a pride and gratitude log. Many of you have heard about a gratitude journal or gratitude log. In fact, there's been a lot of research about its benefits. One of the most interesting studies that I've seen, which has been repeated over and over, is they've taken a group of depressed people and divided them into different subgroups. One group was put on a waiting list as a control group. Another group was given an antidepressant medication, but no therapy. A third group was asked to keep a journal every day. And a fourth group was asked to keep a gratitude journal every day. In other words, to write down things that they can be grateful for every day, no matter how small. After repeating the study a number of times, what they learned about over and over again is that, first of all, the control group did not make any progress. The group on antidepressant medication, but without any psychotherapy, made considerable progress overcoming their depression. The group that was asked to keep a gratitude journal every day, but was not taking any medication, made as much progress in overcoming their depression as the group on medication. And finally, the poor people in the group that were simply asked to keep a journal every day, they got more depressed during the study. Why? Well, the researchers read their journals and found out that they tended to write negative things. They tended to ruminate negatively in writing. They weren't asked to do so, and non-depressed people in keeping a journal are not likely to ruminate negatively in a journal, so this is not an indictment of journaling. But when you're depressed and also when you're socially anxious, and many people experience both, we tend to ruminate negatively about ourselves, and that rumination only makes us feel worse about ourselves. It deepens our depression and our anxiety. Whereas focusing on the positive in our lives helps improve our mood. Now, I've altered this strategy a little bit by adding an element. In addition to writing down every day the things that we can be grateful for, in other words, the positive experiences that we had that day, no matter how small, the pride part of this pride and gratitude log is to also write down the positive things that we did or that we at least contributed to doing. And then the second step is, for each thing that we did or contributed to doing, to ask ourselves, what are the underlying qualities of ours that this is an example of? The way I suggest doing a pride and gratitude log is once a day, think back over the last 24 hours. Try to recall all that you experienced. And whenever you remember something positive, even if it is a small thing, and most of the time they are small things, nonetheless, write it down. If that thing was something that you did or you contributed to doing, then ask yourself the follow-up question, what are the underlying qualities of mine that this is an example of? For example, let's say in the pride and gratitude log on a given day, you write down that the weather was really good and I took a lovely walk. I talked to a friend of mine and was expecting to only talk several minutes, but lo and behold, we ended up talking nearly an hour, and my friend seemed to enjoy the conversation. I did a good job at a certain project during my work. And the second step is to then ask yourself the question, what are the underlying qualities of yours that these are examples of? Now, obviously, I didn't contribute to the good weather, but I did choose to take a good walk then. And I suppose the underlying quality that that's an example of is that I can appreciate small things in life and that I care to take care of myself. In the example of having a good conversation with a friend of mine that went on longer than I anticipated and that my friend seemed to enjoy, the underlying qualities I would identify are that I can be a very good friend, that I could be a very good conversationalist, and that people can really enjoy my friendship and my company. In the example of my doing a reasonably good job at a work project, the underlying quality that I would identify is that I am dedicated to my job and strive to do well. My suggestion is that you do your pride and gratitude log every day. That research I was telling you about earlier, they conducted it again, where in one group, they asked the people keeping a gratitude journal to do it every day, as in the original study, And another group was asked to keep the gratitude journal just once a week, but to record points of gratitude for all 7 days of the previous week. And although both groups wrote approximately the same amount, the group that wrote daily made much more progress than the group that only wrote weekly. The reason is probably because one of the major benefits of keeping a gratitude journal, or in this case, a pride and gratitude log, is to retrain our mind to pay attention to the positive things in our lives and the positive qualities in ourselves. Because our social anxiety, and for many of us, our depression, has trained our mind over the years to pay attention overwhelmingly to the negative things in our lives and the supposed negative and deficient qualities in ourselves. And so we're much more likely to train our minds effectively to focus on the positive about ourselves and our lives if we make an effort to do this daily. So my recommendation is every day, take out your pride and gratitude log, which could be in paper or could be electronic. Think back over the last 24 hours, write down anything positive you experience, and ask yourself for those things that you contributed to doing, what the underlying qualities of yours are that these are examples of. Make sure that you do not disqualify the positive, that you do not say, well, this wasn't very big, or this wasn't good enough, or I also did the same thing the other day, so it doesn't count to do it again. Actually, if you keep doing positive things over and over again, frankly, it counts even more. It's very strong evidence of underlying qualities. Do not disqualify the positive. Include anything and everything that was in some way positive about yourself and the underlying qualities as well. Many people find it helpful to make this a daily routine by identifying something that is already a daily habit of yours. Perhaps every morning during your first cup of coffee, or every night right before going to bed, or maybe every day during lunchtime, some routine that you already have in which you have time to add this 5-minute activity. That might be a good time to regularize doing your pride and gratitude log. I am very optimistic that if you work on these two strategies, being a good parent to yourself and using a daily pride and gratitude log, that you will benefit a great deal, that you will gradually improve your self-confidence and decrease your social anxiety. I'm attaching to this session a document that gives you the instructions on completing a pride and gratitude log. I hope you pursue this and being a good parent to yourself, and that you find them to be very useful strategies. Thank you for attending this session.